How is artificial intelligence impacting healthcare? What is decentralized science? If you're Gen Z, should you be afraid of artificial intelligence or see it as a benefit? All of these questions and more will be discussed in this 60-second edition of the Gen Z Diplomat podcast with Dinidh O'Brien.
We are at the fourth industrial revolution. What does this mean and why is it important?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm super excited to be chatting with you, and these are some really important topics. So, the fourth industrial revolution, I think we have to take a look a little bit at the previous three to really understand what's going on right now. So, with the first industrial revolution, that was kind of mechanized manufacturing, the invention of the steam engine, textile mills, all this stuff that made kind of industry possible, right? Then we had the second industrial revolution. This was like late 19th, early 20th century. And that was kind of this rapid progress, including like adoption of electricity everywhere, invention of the telephone, telegraph, expansion of railroads, etc. Then we have the third, which people are going to be a little bit more familiar with because it's still kind of ongoing, and that's the digital revolution. So computing, telecommunications, the internet, widespread use of phones and laptops, this sort of thing. So that's still kind of ongoing, especially in developing nations, but it's well on its way right now. But what actually has happened is we've had this fourth industrial revolution kind of hit us all of a sudden. And it is a fundamental change to the way that we live, to the way that we relate and work with each other. And this is the revolution of artificial intelligence and machine learning, big data analytics, the Internet of Things, everything being connected all of a sudden, including your fridge and toaster and things like that. But also really cool stuff like robotics and automation, 3D printing, and as it pertains a little bit more to my work, biotech and genetic engineering.
Hmm. And why should someone care about this fourth industrial revolution? Like, should we be worried about it? Should we be thinking of it as a positive? Like, are we moving in the right direction, or are there other thoughts that we should also factor in to this conversation?
Absolutely. So overall, I will say this multiple times during our interview, technologies are a tool, right? And a hammer is a hammer to bang in nails, except when someone's running at you trying to hit you with it, right? Then it becomes a weapon. So we have to keep in mind that all technological developments are tools that can be used either for good, for bad. Why people should care is because this will foundationally and is foundationally changing human society on a global level, and it will touch everything. In the same way, like I kind of remember the time pre-internet or when it wasn't common to have internet in your house. So I remember our first modem getting installed and the little beepy noises that it would make. And this fundamentally changed my life. I still remember in schools, laptops were banned, internet research was frowned upon, and we had to queue up at the library with cards to get books out. So the internet has completely revolutionized, but when we're talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, automation, these are going to affect and already are affecting every single day. So we're exposed as of right now today to so many algorithms on a daily basis through all of our digital interactions, our internet use, our social media use, especially what media we're watching, but also when it comes to our employment and our work and the way that we interact with one another. This is all kind of being guided in the background by algorithms and, let's say, very advanced scripts. And these are having an impact on our lives now. So why we should care is because this is defining not just in the future, but also right now, the way that our lives are being done in the digital realm.
For sure. And speaking of the past three revolutions, it was like every single revolution, people were displaced in terms of jobs, but they also were able to remake themselves when that revolution occurred. So I think one example was, in the industrial revolution of the past, people stopped using their hands and learned how to use machines. That was just an example. But now we're in the midst of a kind of automation crisis. And whenever you talk about AI, people are just, oh, it's going to take my job. You see all these articles about generative AI replacing graphics designers and all of this. So just as the next question, is AI going to take all of our jobs? And is this an overblown fear, or is this kind of like a prescient analysis? What are your thoughts?
For sure, it's a super important topic to talk about, especially right now. One thing that I want to set as a premise for anyone who's maybe an expert even listening on this or knows a lot about it, we don't actually have artificial intelligence yet. We have very, very clever, complex algorithms, basically super advanced scripts. But this kind of Skynet type Terminator thinking for itself, setting its own goals. This hasn't hit us yet. So when we have this conversation, maybe in 5, 10 years time, it will look very different. But that said, when we look at our current generation of AI or algorithms, it's silly to believe that something like this, such an important change, is not going to affect jobs. And even when we're not even talking about replacing jobs, it's going to change them and the way that they're done. So, for example, in my work, I do a lot of public relations, press relations, etc. And something that's very formulaic and a very, let's say, easy part of my job is writing press releases. They follow a certain structure, and this, for me, with generative AI, I can do it, maybe 30 to 40% already of that job can be done by AI. Obviously, I have to give my input, improve it, give it details, etc. But it's already automating a lot of that stuff for me in my current day-to-day job. And there's this concept in programming, and there's even a book on Python called Automate the Boring Stuff. And this is kind of the mantra that I have when it comes to current generations of AI. I see a lot of potential to automate the things that we don't like doing or are very formulaic and can be easily accomplished by machines. And I think even looking in manufacturing or other industries as well, these menial repetitive tasks that, in the same way the previous industrial revolution with textile mills, all was done by hand and woven on looms, and then it turned into mechanized and automated processes. We will see this same shift, and we are seeing the same shift. Especially if you look at car manufacturers, are using a lot of robotics for some of the higher end cars, because it's better quality control and it's automating the boring stuff. So when it comes to the creative, obviously it's going to have an impact. But I think until we have that next generation of AI that can really think for itself and generate out of nothing rather than based on all of these inputs, you talked about graphic designers, for example. What the generative visual AIs are doing right now are just taking in mass amounts of previous designs and and some people would say stealing from artists and creating something based on that, but they're trained on existing artwork. They're not really, I mean, they're starting to be, but they're not at the point where they're creating spontaneously and of
Yeah.
themselves. So that's for sure going to affect the discussion going into the future. But is it an overblown fear? I mean, we could maybe talk about some of the broader implications of AI. I think
Sure.
is very important to talk about these things. I think we need strong regulations and labor protections in place to stop too many people being displaced. But there's a great story about when cars were first invented and the cabbies of London who were going around on horses. And, there are even articles in the 1800s in the newspapers, the early 1900s, saying, oh, they'll never replace us. People will never trust these machines over a person with a horse. And, look where we are now. So I think when it comes to technology, you can never really predict what's actually going to be affected. But when we're talking about these important tools and these revolutions really in our technology, we have to assume that they're going to have a major impact.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think in Life 3.0 by Max Tegmark, he wrote something along the lines of, in the 1900s, we were so obsessed with horses and thought we would never be replacing horses. And then after 1913, horses became like dog food after that. And so that's kind of like how immediate the transition is, or how immediate that kind of revolution can be. So let's say I'm a Gen Z in a high school. Maybe I've just been enrolled in college or university. How should I be thinking about artificial intelligence? Should I be particularly afraid of it? Like, do I have to rethink my entire career path? Or am I a Gen Z, or am I, as a Gen Z, best placed to make the most of it? As a digital native, I've grown up with social media, I've grown up with an iPad or an Alexa within, an arm's reach. How should I be thinking of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. To be honest, I think Gen Z is best placed to benefit from AI and to integrate it. So there's a fundamental human characteristic that all of us have to a certain extent, and that's resistance to change, right? And those growing up with certain technologies. So for me, example, it was getting into the internet age and the first home computers that were becoming more and more common, I definitely struggle less with technology than my parents, for example. But I didn't grow up with cell phones in my pocket or social media. And for me, screen burnout when it comes to my phone specifically is a
Mhm.
significant problem. I'm so tired of notifications and scrolling. And, you know, I don't have this issue with computers because I grew up with that. But when it comes to phones, I feel it a little bit. And I'm only in my mid 30s, right? So, but I think the people who grow up with this tool really have the best ability to kind of incorporate it in their lives with the least amount of struggle or you know or difficulty. And I think you know, when we think about AI and its current iteration, I really would recommend people view them as potential tools to help them, right?
Mhm.
Because it's definitely going to impact some jobs. I think it's definitely going to impact some careers. You know, there's a lot of discussion in Hollywood right now. Screenwriters Guild is protesting and on strike because of companies talking about maybe using AI to generate scripts or movie ideas. And, you know, these are people's livelihoods and their jobs. So it's definitely going to have an impact. But I think when you're like, if you're in high school right now or in college, think about how this tool can help you. It could be in very small ways. For example, writing your resume, your CV, right? When you're applying for a job, you could say, hey, take this job listing, take my resume or my CV, and create a application letter that uses all the right keywords and brings out my best experience. And ChatGPT is currently able to do this. But I think, as I said, when you are thinking about this as a potential tool to help you, it's going to open up some huge potential career possibilities in the future. So I know there are some hospitals already hiring for AI prompt engineers because they're looking to incorporate AI potentially in that first touch care, intake of patients, et cetera. And they're looking for engineers who understand AI and can give it the right prompts. So that's already a field of jobs that is opening up, especially in the tech industry. And so I think when you view it like a tool, just like the internet or just like email or anything like that, you can start to see that there are many job opportunities that are going to come up based on AI. So I wouldn't be scared of it per se, especially when you think of it as that potential helper to
For
help
sure.
you achieve those goals.
For sure. Yeah, I think, just as a TLDR, it would be you don't be scared of it, but also don't ignore it. So two follow-up questions, honestly, just before we get into, the bulk, which is AI healthcare. You said we don't have artificial intelligence, we have just really advanced algorithms and really advanced scripts. So that's a kind of like a possibly a moot question, but do you think we'll ever achieve artificial intelligence, putting consciousness, well, maybe artificial consciousness, but do you think we'll ever achieve AGI? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I've thought about this for a very, very long time, and to be honest, my opinion has changed over the years as I've seen ChatGPT come out, you know, and some of these other AI models. So, for example, there's another company working on analyzing brainwaves to recreate video of thoughts, which is absolutely insane. Which like is the realm of science fiction up until the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
it's actually like 90 to 95% frame by frame accurate to an actual video. So these are like the crazy things that are just happening month after month right now. In terms of the complexity of creating a truly artificial consciousness is very difficult. But if you really look at the human brain, it is just this huge neural network of connectivity and data being sent around. Whether there's this magic element that makes us conscious and human, I don't know. I think that's more of a chat for the big philosophers out there. But if you just look at our progress within the last few years in neural networks and machine learning and vision learning and artificial intelligence is kind of the broad category for all this. You know, I really, I think I would be wrong to say we're not going to achieve it. It's more a matter of when. And it could be decades in the future. There could be, you know, breakthroughs such as quantum computing that make this a whole lot easier just with the pure processing power and opening that up. And I think also you have to remember that, you know, these models and these AI algorithms are being built and built on top of the other and top of the other. And so maybe for one person to just create an artificial consciousness is not possible. When you put all of these AIs together, add in the fact that they can learn from their own programming, I could see it happening.
Sure.
So
Sure. So maybe in the next 20 to 100 years, we'll give a broad time
that's
horizon. It's
safe,
possible.
safe timeline.
You also touched on the broader detriments of artificial intelligence. So just before we get into the AI healthcare, would you be able to speak to the broader detriments? How should people be thinking about the downsides of AI as it currently exists.
Yeah, so it's another really important topic, and I think particularly when we talk about the militarization of AI and hooking it up to a system that has access to nuclear launch codes,
Mhm.
these are things that people are actually legitimately talking about, but also the impersonation of global leaders, since you have voice replication and even digital avatar software now, deepfakes, as most people will know them. You can create some really scary stuff right now with the technology we have. And this really needs to be talked about and figured out because we already have world leaders that are susceptible to phishing attacks and just like email, spear phishing and stuff like that, which is just, some hackers putting in words into an email. So when you add voice emulation, voice modulation, and digital avatars on top of that, it's a really potentially scary situation to be in. And I think the other thing, look at China, for example, where they have behavioral recognition through their extensive surveillance technology, digital and social credit scores based on your behaviors online, your interactions, all being kind of governed and analyzed by AI simply because you can't, keep tabs on a billion plus people with other people. You have to use algorithms and machines. These are all implications and applications of AI that for me are quite concerning. And why, for me personally, my role in AI has been very much on the ethical side and ensuring that the data that's going in and the processing that's happening on the inside is pro public and for the public good, and not just for either private enterprise, but also, uh, government applications that perhaps are less than wholesome.
Yeah, no, I don't think people fully understand how worrisome and scary deep fakes are. If we see how fast controversial news about any particular politician or any particular, let's say, person, um, a celebrity or influencer or whoever, you are able to, replicate their voice, replicate their movements, their gestures, and then send that out. And then at light speed, that thing just um, spreads. And no one really is fact checking this. I mean, I think one fact I wrote in my book was not even like Gen Z don't even want to spend 15 minutes to fact check if what they have shared or what they have read is true or not. And that's horrifying if some malicious group wants to take, a video of a president or another world leader or CEO of a company and then broadcast that out. How many people are going to pump the brakes on spreading that kind of gossip or content or anything? It's very, very scary, and we unfortunately we could be seeing wars being started over it. Other cyber attacks, threats, all of this, and I don't think people are aware of how disastrous this first deep fake fiasco could be. So I just wanted to say that just because we brought it up. But let's stop talking about the dangers of AI, because AI, honestly, and again, people don't realize how beneficial AI could be for something like healthcare, which you are very involved in. So, how is AI revolutionizing healthcare? What interesting developments are happening that you are aware of and maybe that you have worked on?
For sure. It's a super exciting application of AI and one that I'm really passionate and excited about because today there are people who can say that AI or algorithms saved their lives when it came to medical
Wow.
intervention. So one of the big applications is the diagnosis and advanced diagnosis of disease. So for example, visual machine learning on cancer screenings, for example. And it's already showing that algorithms and AI are able to identify cancer tumors before humans are able to. So this is incredible because, as with most diseases, especially potentially terminal ones, the earlier you catch it, the better the chances are for the patient and their final outcome. So that's already going on and is super exciting. Another startup here in Europe that's working on something really cool is connecting with biometrics, so like Apple Watch and other heart monitors, to predict heart attacks and to automatically dispatch first responders and paramedics if someone is having the symptoms of a heart attack, even potentially before they know it, right? This, again, with heart attacks, the faster you respond, the better the outcomes. And it's super exciting. And what I really particularly like about this startup, for example, is that they're committed to open sourcing their algorithm. They want other hospitals to benefit from it. They want to spread it as much as possible. And that's a really exciting thing to see in the space. There's a lot going on as well, for example, in robotics. So there's going to be a large let's say explosion of robotics when it comes to healthcare. So I already know one company, I believe the Da Vinci robot, which is human assisted, but they're training it with input so that their AI can in the future do automatic surgeries. And then of course, like big data analysis, when you look at, for example, pandemics, all of the information that we got about COVID was big data analysis. And using that to make good decisions for public health and pandemic responses and things like that. So these are some of the ways that it's already happening right now. But one of the really exciting ones for me is things like ChatGPT and other models like that. They're already showing that their responses are better in some cases than doctors when it comes to empathetic responses, which was quite
Wow.
surprising to me.
Wow.
But where it could play an incredible role, and especially for anyone in the US listening, I lived in the US for 13 years, and I know what the healthcare system is like. I know what my deductible was, and I know that I personally avoided going to the hospital because of how much it was going to cost me. Same with like primary care and, if you have the flu or things like that. And so what's really exciting about potentially using AI is having it as the first touch primary care for telemedicine. And so rather than bothering, not bothering, but using the resources of specialists who are already overworked and understaffed in a lot of hospitals, you could have this first touch AI doctor or kind of intake specialist that would, based on your symptoms and talking with you, give you some sort of idea of what might be going on. And if it's just a flu, maybe prescribe even medication that would then automatically arrive at your door through the mail. And this could really, if you think about the companies that are wanting to open source this, this could open up primary care for people who currently are not going to the doctor or the hospital because they can't afford it. And that to me is one of the most exciting applications of AI and actually reducing or removing the cost of healthcare for people.
Are there data on how many people would be open to chatting with, ChatGPT or a similar or an analog of it? Just from my perspective, I don't think, if I told my dad, don't go to the hospital, just talk to ChatGPT, he'd look at me like I was crazy. So, like, how do you think it would be received by people? Obviously, you did bring up price and, the absurd cost of healthcare in places like the United States. So, how do you think this technology would be received by people or is being
Yeah,
received?
so yeah, on the one hand, I think going back to our discussion about Gen Z, the people who grow up with these technologies are going to be way more comfortable with them, right?
Sure.
And so for me personally, I'm in my mid 30s, but I'm part of that kind of tech revolution, that tech generation, and I'm okay with a doctor, an AI doctor giving me like the simple diagnoses, right? I don't particularly want to hear from a robot that I have terminal cancer. I would still prefer to hear from a human doctor on that. But if I'm just logging on to a online, telemedicine service and putting in some symptoms and having a conversation with a advanced AI chat based, doctor, for example, I'm okay with that. And I think if you look at the broad, I don't know if they've done specific studies yet on chat GPT. It's still very early. But when you look at the broad studies on digital medicine, telehealth, there is a growing support for this. And people actually, especially after the pandemic, where you couldn't go outside and, we're on lockdown and maybe you had something going on, but you couldn't go to your doctor because you've been told to, stay at home. The support for telemedicine has grown significantly since the pandemic. So I think definitely it's going to be easier for younger generations, but I think we'd also be surprised when you have not like the old school e-commerce chatbots that don't understand you and they're a pain in the ass to listen to and they don't, give you the answers you want. But if we're talking about these advanced algorithms, these AI chatbots, I think they're getting to the point of passing the Turing test, and that's really going to be a barrier for entry for a lot of people to accept them.
Yeah, it's a very exciting prospect of people being or having more access to healthcare, and it also kind of, in a way, democratizes healthcare and gives people in other countries access to really high quality healthcare as well. Because if we're talking about a chatbot or a healthcare chatbot, they're only going to be trained on the highest quality data, And so it's not just people in the United States, for example, it'll be people in Canada, people in Mexico, possibly people in, rising countries or poorer countries rather, like Africa or India or something. And so this really gives like the power that ChatGPT has given people in terms of, coding and text generation and art, it'll give them in terms of healthcare. Um, so unfortunately, we also have to talk about the detriments of AI healthcare because, problems exist in artificial intelligence like bias and, opaqueness and responsibility. So what are these detriments in AI healthcare and how should we be thinking about it?
For sure. So this is what we're working on specifically at my company and foundation, the Donate Your Data Foundation and Data Lake. Bias in the data is a huge issue, and another really, really serious issue, especially when we're talking about AI and the applications of technology in healthcare, is a lack of representation. So typically, when it comes to medical data, the biggest represented demographic, as might not be a surprise, is white Western males, relatively affluent, middle class, or from Western countries. What this means is an AI that is built for some sort of healthcare application may not work the same for a minority or even for a woman who, I think it depends on the country, but it's something like only 20 to 23% of medical data and studies are for women specifically when they're 50% of the world's population. So this is a really big problem, bias and a lack of representation in data. And that's really what we're trying to work on at my organizations to secure ethical access to these large data sets, which will help reduce the bias, but also help improve the representation. Because really, AI in healthcare has the possibility to revolutionize our care. But as another old programming adage is garbage in, garbage out. And if your data is garbage or if it's biased, your output, your AI algorithm, your robotics are going to be biased and potentially garbage. So this is one of the main issues. Another one is that a lot of these algorithms are just black boxes right now. We don't know what's happening on the inside. We don't know what biases it may have, not just the data being biased, but the bias actually in the programming. And another thing is that we don't know who's maybe pushed the finger on the scale of what the objectives of the AI are, right? So let's say you have talking about primary care, first touch doctor, telemedicine, it's all using algorithms, but those algorithms are skewed by a health insurance company who helped funded it to ensure that they spend the least amount of money on treatment, right? And then all of a sudden you're getting sub-quality care. You're not getting the care that you need potentially because the people who made the AI are most interested in the financial outcome. So these are all important questions. And I think another thing, there are these paradoxes that emerge. Let's say you go to a hospital who has implemented an AI system and the AI diagnoses you with a certain disease or illness. And then a doctor steps in and goes, hey, based on my human experience and my 20 years of working as a practicing doctor, I don't think it's, a sinus infection. I think it's nasal cancer or something like this, right? What happens? Who do you go with? Who has liability? And then even to a second layer of that, what if you have a doctor and an AI on one side and a doctor and the AI on the other? Who do you trust? Who do you listen to? And these are not entirely new discussions when it comes to second opinions in healthcare, but they're definitely on a new level when you have this technology that people tend to innately trust because they think it's a neutral third party. But behind the scenes, there is still a lot of bias. And trust in healthcare is a major factor when it comes to the adoption of a technology and the eventual outcomes. So these are all super important things that we're currently discussing. So our co-founder Ligia Kornowska, she's the head of the AI and Healthcare Coalition in Poland, and they released a white paper exactly on this, discussing all the intricacies of how AI should be implemented and the ethics and the kind of philosophy behind it. But it's going to take a much broader discussion. I know the EU government's talking about it right now with the AI Act and have just passed that. But on a global scale, as I said, we release these kind of algorithms into the wild. We need to have rules for engagement in place. And I think, as with all technological revolutions, legislation is always behind the technology itself.
Sure, sure. It reminds me of the kind of self-driving conundrum where people don't know who to blame when a self-driving car crashes because you can't blame the passenger because they weren't driving. You can't blame the company because they have cars that haven't crashed. You can't blame the programmers because obviously the car wouldn't be on the street if it were prone to crashing. And you can't blame like the advertisers or the marketers. So it's kind of some fault has occurred, but you don't know who to blame. Can you speak initially to these conundrums, like you talked about the white paper? Are there any intricacies that are of note to you?
Yeah, so the primary one for me is stakeholder consultancy, right? So we're talking about these algorithms that are going to affect patients, and a lot of times it's just experts or governments talking about it and not consulting with patients. So for me, making people and the end users or the end receivers of AI and these technological developments a big part of the discussion is super important. And we're doing a lot of this. So in our Donate Your Data campaign, where we're trying to get people to donate their data to medical researchers, what we're actually doing is going into hospitals, talking with patients, talking about their concerns, explaining the technology to them, and making them very much part of the process. And I don't think that you can talk about these society-wide changes in technology without actually engaging society and finding out what the consensus is, right? Because often the experts are so stuck in their field that they're great at what they do, maybe in the development or the research, but the applications really take a much broader approach. So that for me is really important, and making sure from a legislative point of view that we have the guardrails in place, that we have the decisions made, and that we have strong laws to help protect consumers. And thankfully in Europe we have a lot of those. But again, we're talking about these developing technologies where politicians are 5, 10 years behind, still figuring out how to use social media, let alone what AI is going to do to change everything about our society. So
Right, right. Just if we were to step away from AI, but still, stay on healthcare, healthcare data is quite sensitive, and blockchain is fully transparent and open. So how is blockchain being applied to the medical industry, and what are people uninformed about regarding this application?
for sure. So, just for anyone who maybe is not 100% aware, blockchain is a way of sharing information in a way that is tamper-proof and verifiable, open and transparent. And basically, one block of data should be equal to the same block of data on any other copy of this data. That said, when you put something on the blockchain, it is permanent, it is forever, you can't remove it. And potentially, especially with large blockchains, it could be copied in the tens of thousands of instances at the same time, right? So putting actual personal data on the blockchain, at least in Europe, is illegal. You can't do it because we have the GDPR law, which gives us the right to be forgotten, which is a fantastic right that any EU citizen can say, go to a website and say, you have this post of me, you have this picture of me, or I contributed to your site, I want it gone. And they have to comply, which is fantastic. But blockchain kind of messes with that because you're not just giving your data to someone, you're giving it to potentially 10,000 different people at the same time and making those copies. So when it comes to actually putting personal data on the blockchain, it's an idea almost as old as the blockchain, and it's a terrible idea. How we're implementing blockchain specifically in the medical field is we are using blockchain technology to create a verifiable and transparent system of consent for people who want to contribute to medical science. So what that means is we believe, number one, that if you are going to contribute your data to someone else, it should be based on your consent. You should have the say whether it goes or it doesn't. You also have the right to remove that consent, and that's actually enshrined in a subsequent EU law called the Data Governance Act, and I believe will kind of provide the foundation for some of the US's upcoming legislations on data. So what we don't want to have happen is that the public or patients have to trust us that in our privately held database, they're marked as a donor, as a consent or non-consent. These are our most important data sets, as you said, our most sensitive data sets. And we want it to be an open and transparent system where if we say that we are not using your medical data, that researchers are not using your medical data, that instance of revocation of consent is viewable by anyone and you can trust it, right? You don't have to trust us. You can trust the data, you can trust the blockchain. So when we're talking about open transparency and verifiability and the removal of trust from a data interaction, that's really where blockchain has the most applications. So view it as a way to keep companies and people and even governments accountable. And when you view it from that perspective, even when we're talking about pharmaceutical development, et cetera, using chain of command and ensuring traceability over, for example, drugs and potentially a bad batch of drugs from a manufacturer, you can be absolutely sure if that is traced through the blockchain that they're not tampering with the data. And if they are, it shows up immediately. So it's really for us a tool of accountability and transparency when it comes to healthcare.
What is decentralized science?
Decentralized science, DeSci. It's one of my favorite movements. I have to say, it's more of a movement than anything else, and it's something that's really growing. So it built on top of the open science kind of movement, opening up collaboration, interdisciplinary teams, and it's using blockchain and other Web3 technologies to advance scientific research, development, transparency, decentralization, all of my favorite words,
Yeah.
into the scientific research and development process, but also funding. So as I mentioned, we're using it when it comes to consent-based medical data access. One of our partners is called Genomes, and they're using it for genomic data. So they're creating these secure vaults that people can get their, like 23andMe, get their DNA sequenced. It goes into a vault, and they have full control and verifiability of any access to that data or lack thereof. So even in the genomic space, it's taking root. And then, as I said, scientific and medical research. So there's one group called Athena DAO, and they're crowdfunding women's healthcare research. But also it's being applied in scientific publishing. So if anyone knows of Elsevier, they probably know it's not a great organization. They are the gatekeepers of scientific publication, and they charge ridiculous amounts of money for people to get their scientific research published. This is problematic. It's very slow, it's ineffective, and it is, again, subject to these people in the background who are putting their finger on the scale of what gets published, what doesn't get published. And so by using blockchain and open source and kind of crowdsource tools, you can apply it to whether it's funding, whether it's publication, or the actual research itself. Apply these tools to make it more equitable, more transparent, and more crowdsourced. And that's really the decentralized aspect, is basically breaking down these national barriers that we have, but even organizational barriers that happen, and kind of taking the open source approach to research, scientific data, all of these things that are super important for, talking about AI and all of that. Opening up data in as much legal and ethical way as possible, I think, is really crucial to ensure that we have the output and the tools that serve us rather than, are forced upon us by whoever's making them.
For sure, sure. You give such comprehensive answers. I'm gonna have so many clips to put out on my YouTube channel now.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so we've absolutely we've talked about blockchain, we've talked about decentralization, you know, the aspect of trustless. So we have to come to it. What are your thoughts on the cryptocurrency revolution? Are there benefits, or is this just a techno fad?
Yeah, it's a big topic, and I may have a little bit of a different answer than a lot of people who are in blockchain or cryptocurrency. So, to preface, I think about 90% of cryptocurrency is absolute nonsense.
Mhm.
A lot of it is scams, a lot of it is Ponzi schemes, a lot of it is just, vaporware that's never really planned to come to market. It's just a good way to make some money. So I've been in the privacy space for a long time, but I got into crypto, I believe, in like 2012. So my first Bitcoin that I bought was under $50. And
Wow.
during that, yeah, is way back when. I also helped launch one of the first business direct to consumer companies that accepted cryptocurrency payments. I think that was in 2013. So I've been in the space a long time, and I've been following the space in a long time. A lot of it on Bitcoin forums and deep web forums and stuff like that. And when it first started, it really was this kind of societal revolution, this way to take big financial interests out of our day-to-day transactions, a way for us to exchange data in a fair way, and equitable, transparent, and removing the need primarily to trust financial organizations. And then sometime after Binance launched their smart chain, and this kind of meme coin casino exploded, it lost a lot of these fundamentals, which for me was really difficult to watch, because when you look at it from the technological point of view, blockchain has so much to offer and can be it's one of the fairest technologies we have, lies and scams and all of that. In theory, the blockchain can help solve these by making things verifiable, removing trust. Yeah, and then we went to meme coins and overpriced monkey pictures, NFTs for profile pictures, and
Yeah.
so we lost a lot of that. Is it a techno fad? I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. So when you actually take the technology behind it, the European government has already started to implement blockchain technology in our digital identity verification. So we have this new
Hmm.
regulation coming out where they have said blockchain technology and self-sovereign identity, which is part of that, is going to be the way forward for anyone verifying who they are online. Also for signing contracts, for making any legal agreement, to be able to put the time, date, and contents of a legal agreement on the blockchain, so no one can change dates or remove a signature or any of this stuff. So the actual applications behind the scenes are huge, and it's as I said already, in healthcare we're seeing it, but in all industries there is some movements in from blockchain. But as we know it right now with meme coins and celebrity endorsements and all of this nonsense, like honestly, I hope that goes away because
Yeah.
it's taking away from the real fundamentals of what this technology can offer society.
What are your thoughts on Bitcoin specifically? So in my mind, Bitcoin, I separate Bitcoin out of cryptocurrency because, well, for a number of reasons, but it's a surprisingly different technology. Like I think Michael Saylor said that Bitcoin isn't cryptocurrency, but it's crypto property. So is it the same thing in your mind? Do you group Bitcoin into this hype of other cryptocurrencies, or do you think Bitcoin as a separate force for good?
I think it's different in the sense that it is kind of the original cryptocurrency, and a
Sure.
lot of the issues that it aimed to solve at the beginning, it actually did, right? So, do we need 1,000 copies of it? Maybe not, because we have Bitcoin. Also, they're doing continuous development. So, they launched a Lightning Network, which reduced fees dramatically. You can exchange Bitcoin for a few cents on the dollar now. And then also they've just launched, or they're going to be launching soon, smart contracts, which allow for all of this cool functionality, automation, and that to me is super exciting. Is it fundamentally so different from any of the copies that came subsequently? No, and I do think that unfortunately it's been latched onto as more of a speculative investment. And that is something that it's not been able to shake. It's like the original creator of hype about where can the price go and what am I going to be worth in a few years and how much money can I make here. And so I think in that sense, it's definitely kind of become like the Wall Street of cryptocurrency in the sense that it is very much the main mainstream attractor of investment and the interests that come with it with financial investment. That said, I think that doesn't change the fundamental things that it brought to the table originally. The open, transparent system of being able to exchange value and exchange data and ensure that that data can be exchanged and trusted or is trustless. So those things haven't changed, but I think it's really like with any technology, and I'll say this about everything, when you put it out in the world, you can't control what the world is going to do with it.
Mhm.
And so while, Satoshi and some of the other founders had the right intentions, I think once you put your creation out into the world, kind of like Frankenstein's monster, it will do what it wants.
Sure.
And so, I feel less bad about it in terms of some of these other projects that have come up that are typically just using marketing hype to create value. They don't really add anything. And I think
Mhm.
Bitcoin can replace a large percentage of what's out there in terms of, you know, um, exchange of value vehicle.
Mhm.
So again, like I've been in blockchain a long time. I love the technology, but I also think that it has been co-opted across the board, even with Bitcoin, by bigger interests, and many of them are not looking out for the original principles and for the people.
Yeah. Well, I hope that Bitcoin can retain its core values, and I feel like all the Bitcoin maximalists in the Bitcoin community are going to make sure of that. So just to end on a positive note, buy Bitcoin. So clearly data is important, but no one really cares about their online data. Should they start caring, and why should they?
Yeah, I mentioned I've been in the privacy space a long time, so I remember when we were talking about privacy on ICQ and AOL Instant Messenger, which maybe your listeners may not be familiar with if they're Gen Z,
Yeah.
but it was. way back in the day, mid late 90s. And back then, if you thought that the government was collecting and analyzing your data, you were considered a conspiracy theorist. Like people would make fun of you, say that's nonsense. And then we had the Snowden leaks, we had Cambridge Analytica scandal, WikiLeaks, etc. They really changed this and brought awareness of privacy and data into the public space. And so, I'll push back on one thing. No one really cares about the online data. So, according to the Internet Society, 75% of people worldwide are distrustful of the way that their data is stored and shared right now. And in the US, at least, 80% of people are concerned about the way their data is handled by private companies and the government. 80%. So 8 in 10 are actually concerned about the way their data is being used. That said, only 30% more or less of consumers have terminated a relationship with the company because of their data practices, right? So 8 in 10 people say this is a big problem. Only 3 in 10 are actually doing something about it. Um, so this is what I would frame. Instead of people not caring about their data, this is what I think is going on, just having watched the space for a long time. I think as the mining of our data and the abuse of it and everything that's going on in these black box companies, it's become so commonplace that I think on the one hand, people feel maybe powerless to do anything about it. Because everything is tracked, everything, all of our data is being collected, it's being run through, we encounter dozens of algorithms per day. Every time you turn on your phone, you're interacting actually with an algorithm and data collection. And I think actually what that's had is number two, a knock-on effect of making people a little bit more apathetic. But it's because like, well, I can't do anything about it, so why should I really care, right? But inside we have this understanding and this knowledge that our data is being used for purposes that maybe we disagree with, but we just feel like we can't do so much about it. So that's why, for me, I would say people do care, but they feel quite powerless. And so in that sense, I would really urge people, especially those listening, to do something about it. And it's really easy. Like you can start using privacy focused browsers, like ditch Google Chrome, start using Brave, or DuckDuckGo is launching a browser as well. Use ad blockers and a VPN. And just be super careful about what you share online, because that can be used. We talked a little bit about China and this behaviorally based social credit system. Who knows what other governments are doing? They're for sure interested in this technology, typically under the guise of like security and anti-terrorism. But at the end of the day, those who govern us have a vested interest in knowing what people are thinking and how they're acting and what they have the potential to do. And a lot of this data is coming from our online interactions. So these easy steps of, even for me, I ditched Gmail after. So I remember Google Mail was invite only, and I got one of the invites. This must have been like early 2000s. I've been with
Wow.
them for more than 20 years, and it finally got to the point like understanding what was going on, how they're actually running language analysis on your emails if you're not paying for their paid software. So any free Gmail account, your emails are being read and analyzed by Google without a
Mm.
question. So once I realized that, I switched over to Proton Mail and end-to-end encrypted mail services, and services like Telegram, where hopefully the messages can't be intercepted. But these are some like easy things that people can do, and the other thing to really keep in mind is that it's not just like, oh, this one interaction, should this be shared or is this being tracked? It is every single interaction, every search that you do, every click that you make. When you add in eye tracking software, for example, it's what you're looking at, how long you spend on a certain thing, which all builds this profile. And the more data, especially for people in Gen Z who are like digital babies and had their first like birthdays on Instagram or whatever,
Yeah, yeah.
you really have this enormous set of data, and the ability with these tracking software from companies to put all of these bits together, and then all of a sudden, you really can be profiled to a high extent. And I've seen this in my previous job with digital marketing. You can create highly specific, highly targeted ads based on someone's interactions, who they're friends with, what they like, what they've clicked on in the past, what kinds of videos they post, language analysis in their Instagram stories or whatever. And you can really narrow down someone to basically knowing exactly who they are in their own city based on all these parameters. So it's we're not quite at Minority Report level of society yet, but we have all of those tools in place, and you really have to be aware that they are constantly running in the background.
I have to ask, and I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist or anything, but do you actually believe that, these encrypted services are actually encrypted? Like iMessage, for example, is proposed to be end-to-end encrypted, but, you know, I think a lot of people are still skeptical about that. So even if it's being advertised like Telegram or Proton or iMessage or even WhatsApp is said to be encrypted, uh, do you fully believe it? Is there some, in the back of your mind, are you skeptical about this? What are your thoughts on this? We don't read it. It's all encrypted. Don't worry. Use our service. It's free and it's encrypted, and we don't want to make any money off of it. Like, do you actually believe this?
Yes and no. I know that's a
Okay.
terrible way to
Okay.
answer a question, but
Sure.
so on the one hand, I think if we're going to multiple layers of psyops, you would assume that the government or governments or three-letter agencies would have a vested interest in putting out media out there that says, "Oh yes, end-to-end encryption is safe, and you should rely on these tools, etc." One thing that actually gives me a little bit of hope is when you see lawsuits, for example, with Apple or with Proton Mail, where the governments had said, we want this data. It's part of a lawsuit. You're being subpoenaed for it, and the companies can literally respond, "We don't have access to it. We don't have the keys.
Mhm.
Sorry." So we can give you the encrypted data, but unless you're able to break that encryption, which in some cases they are, then I would hope that this is indicative that they actually can't access the data.
Sure.
I think I've always been of the opinion that if you're putting it online or on a digital format, it can and will be hacked.
Mhm.
And even when we like put end-to-end encryption aside, there was a an app recently, I can't remember the name, it was just in the news yesterday, that was being used by criminals and drug dealers to communicate securely online, right? So they didn't trust Telegram or WhatsApp, they were using this other app. And the Interpol didn't actually break the encryption. They very cryptically in this article said, through a technological insertion means we were able to gain access to the data unencrypted. So whether I don't know, did they like break into a server complex somewhere and hack directly into the? I don't know what that means, and they're not going to share it.
Sure.
But we have to assume, just for safety's sake, if you're ever doing something, which I would recommend not to, but it's illegal. But it also talking about like conscientious protesters, people like journalists who are leaking news of abuses abroad, human rights activists. These are all people targeted by the various governments, various agencies. And for people who are breaking the law in that sense, in a good way, you have to imagine that anything you do online or in a digital connected device can be intercepted either by keyloggers, where who cares about the encryption, they're getting the actual keys being pressed, or potentially breaking encryption that we currently think is unbreakable. But just as a side note, quantum computing changes this entirely. What used to be unbreakable becomes more easily breakable, more quickly breakable, and so we have to keep up with our encryption algorithms, but at the same time assume that they're maybe not working if it's like life or death for you and you're reporting on human rights abuses abroad.
For sure. No, I just wanted to mention a quick dichotomy, but it's interesting that we just talked about like, personal information being on the blockchain, which is immutable and open, transparent everywhere. But then we're also talking about like search for dog videos with a VPN using DuckDuckGo. It's like, what kind of world do we live in right now? But please, if you have thoughts on quantum computing, I would love to hear them. What are your thoughts on quantum computing and what kind of a game changer is it?
So it's super exciting, especially to see it kind of come down to a more portable, and when I say portable, like room-sized device, and it's only going to get smaller. I mean, the applications are absolutely wide-ranging, even from like physics and our understanding of the universe and scientific research in those disciplines, but also just in the sheer ability to accomplish things faster and analyze things faster. When it comes to, like I said, the healthcare applications, it means finding potential. So using algorithms right now to find new drug candidates. It takes a long time. You have to run the programs. They can run sometimes for months. And this is a technology that could cut that down into hours, days, maybe even minutes or seconds. We don't know. So its ability to analyze large data sets and produce the outputs, whether it's 3D printed drugs or treatments or even cancer analysis, these sorts of things are only going to speed up. And when it comes to critical life-saving healthcare, which obviously is kind of my discipline, that means faster results, faster improvements, faster treatments for patients. So the applications are super broad, so I think it would be like a whole other podcast to get into it.
For sure.
But in terms of speeding up our ability to find solutions to current problems, especially in healthcare, it's super exciting. And I think especially as it, reaches critical mass and more, public reachability. I mean, even I think Google and IBM are starting to open up their supercomputers to people. So having that kind of power at our fingertips, when you pair that with, this kind of individual entrepreneurship, people just out there who aren't part of a research institute, but they have good ideas,
Mhm.
they might then be able to benefit from this technology for, citizen science, citizen research, which to me is super exciting.
This is such an insane time that we live in that we can talk about these technologies and just, you know, ideate. So we've talked
For
about
sure.
artificial intelligence, we've talked about decentralized science, blockchain, cryptocurrency, healthcare, quantum computing. I didn't even know we were going to get into that today, so thank you for that. Um, it's possible that it's possible that someone doesn't engage in any of these technologies. But one thing that I think everyone will experience is burnout at some point in their lives, unfortunately. And so you have experience with burnout. We talked about it
I
on
do.
our last call. And so, what is your kind of, I guess, maybe a metaphorical cure or an actual cure for burnout, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean I've been working I think about 15 years now. Yeah, more or less a little bit longer. And often in the startup space, which is just such a frenetic pace, and you're working, like 60 hours a week is a good week in a startup, let alone, 40, which is more reasonable.
For sure.
So it's bound to happen, especially when you're working in emerging technologies or really any job that is high demand. And one thing, the reason why I think about it or have thought about it a lot, not just also having experienced it, but also as a manager who has people under me and wanting to make sure that they're doing okay, and performing well, sure, but at the end of the day, happy people do good work, right? And if you enjoy your
True.
life and you're not feeling worn down and you're sleeping well and all of these things, you actually wake up ready to go to work. And that for me, the times when I knew that I was starting to burn out was when I was waking up hating my life. I have a great
Mm.
life. I'm happily married. I live in Italy. I'm working in emerging tech, all things that, some people may dream of. And you just wake up and say, like, I hate my life. I can't do this today. And that for me is kind of the main sign of burnout for me. Because I'm very good at ignoring it for a long time, and your listeners maybe too, where just for months and months you're like, I ignore, like I can do this and just get
Yeah.
through it, and I have one more task to do, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're like, okay, I'm quitting my job because I can't do this, and you
Yeah.
haven't really planned it out. So how I've really countered that is I found that the wavelength of cities and the frenetic pace and the energy was just too much for me, especially when I have that same wavelength of energy in my day-to-day job. And so from like 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, it's go, go, go. And the city never let me detach from that and just relax fully. So a big shift for me was moving to the mountains in Italy. I'm at I think 4,300 feet, so 1,200 meters or so.
I'll hide
We
my
have ski
jealousy.
lifts. We have ski lifts 2 minute walk from my house.
Sure.
And that for me was a huge shift because being somewhere beautiful, being surrounded by nature, and this like easygoing life of everyone else helps me sink more to that wavelength while still being super, um, performative and I have performance goals and our company has must wins. But at the end of the day, I can just detach and relax. But I think the real, I mean, not everyone has opportunity to do that. I fully understand. I'm very lucky that I am Italian and could easily move here. But the thing that really changed it for me was a practice of mindfulness, meditation, and yoga, and putting those into my life purposefully. Those have anyone can do it. You can just sit in your apartment or in your room or your dorm, and just have that practice of meditation, even in like you don't even have to call it meditation, just sit with your eyes closed for 10-15 minutes at some point during the day and chill. And it's not even about having an empty mind, it's about processing and just bringing your energy levels down. That for me was absolutely transformative. But also this mindfulness practice and reminding yourself of the important things in life and talking through your issues and just being aware of what's going on mentally and physically in your own body. These are things that have a huge impact on burnout. And I can say, like, since I made these changes, I haven't felt that. And I think for sure, just the last thing is working in a position or in a field or a job that just meshes with who you are as a person and makes you excited and that you're passionate about.
For
That to
sure.
me will get you through many, many difficult days while not feeling burned out like you would in a job that you hate or just not particularly passionate about.
For sure. And if people are interested, I'm not sponsored, but I really enjoy the Waking Up app by Sam Harris. It's a fantastic app, and you know, it's super beneficial, especially the introductory course. I'm doing it a second time around, and morning and night, engaging in some form of meditation. It's You don't know how beneficial it is until you try it. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so last but not least, this is the Gen Z Diplomat podcast, and I've really enjoyed this conversation with you. So, last question is, what advice do you have for Gen Z?
So, a couple of points that for me have been transformational. So number one is be curious and constantly learning. Don't just settle for what you already know or what's quote unquote in your wheelhouse. By being curious and constantly learning, you're going to find out things that you didn't know about yourself, about opportunities out there that you didn't even know existed. And that opens up all kinds of opportunities for you personally, professionally, your career, all that kind of stuff. And follow, it's going to sound cliche, but really follow your passions. Like I said before, if you're working in a field that you are passionate about, you can ignore all kinds of other things that are going wrong when you are driven to achieve something. And for me, I have had a varied career. I've worked in tech startup founding, consulting and founding. I've worked as a journalist for a little while in marketing and PR. So I've had like a varied career, and I can say, until my early 30s, I really had no idea what it was that I actually wanted to do. And that's okay. Like, you don't have to decide who you're going to be in 10, 15 years time. But if you're curious about yourself and your own passions and interests, you will start to build this career, but also just this person of who you are based on your experiences that will support you in your future endeavors and goals. And I think the other thing, just to finish on that thought, I still suffer from imposter syndrome. And even my colleagues who are doctors, one of my CEO or my president, she's a doctor, an economist, and she was voted one of the top 100 women in AI, one of the top 100 most influential people in Polish healthcare. And yet we talk about all the time imposter syndrome that she feels as a young person, just turned 30, working in the medical field. So it will never go away. But if I could put all of that aside and just believe in myself a little bit more 10 years ago in my career, who knows where I'd be at this point. It's taken time to build that up, and that's okay. And I think the other advice that I have, there's kind of a lot of talk about work reform and people quitting their jobs because they're not treating them well. And I will say this: working for a company that actually sees you as a human and cares about you will make all the difference in your future. And I'm very, very lucky to work with doctors who see us as human first and care about our mental and physical well-being before they care about our output. And we have all that, as I said, like performance goals, and I have my weekly must wins and to-do lists. But at the end of the day, if I'm not feeling well, or if I need a day, or I'm just having like a shitty day and I need to take a break for my mental health, they're 100% understanding, and that makes all the difference. So I would just say this is not the most common out there. There are a lot of companies that just don't care,
Yeah.
but if you can find one that does care about you as a person, and not just words but actually puts that into practice, it will absolutely change your working life. So don't settle for yourself, don't settle for your career, don't settle for who you're working with, and really believe that you deserve and can achieve more. And I hate how cliche that sounds saying it, but really, those principles have been absolutely transformational to where I was in my late teens, early 20s to where I am now.
It may be cliche, but it doesn't reduce the importance of it being said. Sometimes the cliches are always lost in the wind, and so people hearing this from someone as experienced, as intelligent, as wise, and as accomplished as someone like you, it makes a major difference in how they structure their life and how they plan their life. Danny, this was an amazing conversation with you. I really enjoyed it. All the topics we covered and places the conversations went. So where can people find you on this in cyberspace?
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure for me, and I really hope that your audience finds it interesting, enlightening, and hopefully maybe comforting in some respects if they're scared of this Skynet AI future that we're looking at. So you can find me pretty much on all social media networks at Gradivis, Gradivis. And if you're interested in what we're building in terms of the healthcare applications of AI and consent-based ethical medical data access, you can go to donateyourdata.io. And that website has all the information on what we're doing, the hospitals we're working with, and everything else. So, yeah,
Fantastic. We'll
always happy
link,
to connect.
yeah, 100%. We'll link everything in the description. Denny, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we bump into each other again.